In this video, we'll use timers to flash and output light. I've already configured the hardware here, and I've set up one variable. It's an output connected to my relay module. I'll connect the green light to that. And I've started a ladder program. I haven't put anything in it yet. So we'll start by placing a timer, and to do that we just right click with the mouse and go down, use our FFB, that stands for functions and function blocks, our input assistant. Now the toughest part of this is usually locating the function block because there's such a large number of them. If we select this checkbox down here and go into the library set, it lists all the functions and function blocks in Unity Pro. Now to reduce that a bit, we've got three checkboxes up here. EF stands for elementary functions. Those are blocks that have inputs and outputs but don't have any internal value. So ands, ors, multiplying, addition, those would be examples of elementary functions. EFB is elementary function blocks. They have inputs and outputs and internal value. So examples of them could be a timer, a counter. It has a retained value in it, so that's an elementary function block. A DFB is a derived function block, and those are custom function blocks that we'll build in a future lab. So it's not going to be a derived function block, we'll turn that off. It's not going to be an elementary function, we'll turn that off. And we're left with a long list of elementary function blocks. So we'll take a stab at it, and it's a timer we're looking for. So I think it's going to start with a T. So T, and leave the asterisk behind it, and that'll bring up everything that has a T for the first letter. And there we go. We got a T off, which is an off delay timer. We have a T on is an on delay timer, and TP is a pulse timer. And I'm going to use a pulse timer for this solution. So I OK it, and I can OK it again. And now I'll place it wherever I click on the page. So there's our timer. Now to make this thing work, I'm going to hook up an input contact. So we'll put it right about here. So that'll feed my input. I'll put some connectors. Left a bit of room, so if I have to add anything later, I don't have to move everything around. And I've got a coil. I'll connect that to my output. And to make this thing work, I think I need a normally closed contact, so I'm going to change that. Okay, that's good. Now to do what I want to do to make a flashing light, I'm going to need two of these. So I'm just going to copy that, right click to copy, paste that. There we go. Okay, now we got to address these things. This contact here is going to be a normally open, so I'm going to change that one right now. I double click to add an address. I haven't defined a variable for this, but I can actually do it right in the sheet if I want. So I'm going to call this timer trigger. And OK it. And because it's not in my list of variables, it allows me to create it. I'm going to make it an eBoolean timer trigger. This one is not an input and it's not an output, so I'm going to use a different type of variable. It's a memory variable, %m0. I'll start out the bottom. And that is a variable I'll use only within the program, and it's just going to provide logic from one rung to another. So I don't have an input address, I don't have an output address with it. If I want, I could add a comment to it. And click the checkbox. There we go. I'm going to address this coil with the same address. Right click. Now it should be in there. Yeah, my green light was in my directory initially. Now I've got my timer trigger. We'll add that. OK it. Same thing here, I'm going to use timer trigger here. So this is just a variable that's going to tie all my logic together. And OK that. And finally down here is going to be my green light. And OK that. There. Now we've got it set up. So what should happen is this pulse timer, when I turn on my power, it's going to get a signal. It's going to start timing. As soon as this timer pulse starts timing, it actually generates a pulse, which is going to energize this coil, which is going to cause this contact to close, which is going to energize my second timer, and that's going to give me a pulse and turn my green light on. And on the next scan, this contact is going to open and disable this pulse timer, and a pulse timer is going to stay energized for whatever time I've programmed into it. So the key thing to make this work, I got to add a couple of times. So PT is my preset time. So if I can click on it, double click, I can enter a time. The format for time is $, and then the time. I'm going to give it 5 seconds. So 5S. And OK it. So that's given me a 5-second timer. This one I'm going to give it 2 seconds. And I can do it $, and if I want, I can time it in milliseconds. So I could do 2000 ms, milliseconds, and check it. And I think we're in business. Now, if you wanted a little more information on these blocks and you weren't sure how they worked, you can click on the block, right-click on it, and get Help on Type. And it brings up information about the pulse timer. And it shows you how to program it in a function block diagram style, how to program it in a ladder diagram style. Instruction list is another way. We'll do that later. Structured text is another language we could use. It talks about the inputs. So here's the table of inputs. It's got 2 inputs, a signal input and our preset time. Explains what they are. Talks about what data type it is. So if that was the first time you were using time, you can click on this and it brings up an explanation of how the time variable works. And same thing goes for the outputs. And it gives a timing diagram that shows for a given input how the output responds and what the elapsed time is. And the fine print at the bottom is usually the key stuff that you want to make sure you're aware of. Okay, one other option we'd have on these blocks, they all have an enable pin in and an enable pin out. If you're not using them and you don't want to look at them, then you can right-click on the block, select Properties, and on there it gives a bit of a description what your inputs and outputs are. You can check the Show Enable Pin block, apply it, there, and it removed the enable on us. And if you want to do that down here, I guess we could. Okay, we're programmed. We still have to build it. I'm going to transfer it to a real PLC and run it. So build our changes. Okay, we're going to be in standard mode. We want to program. Ooh, I should have built it first. When you change from standard to simulated, you have to change the build. Okay, set our address. USB, I'm going to program. You're probably going to be using Ethernet. Okay, that. Connect. Now we can transfer it. And run it. Now you can't see exactly what's happening because some of it happens too fast. but the green light is flashing. Every 5 seconds, this timer is producing a new pulse, and every 2 seconds, this timer is giving every 5 seconds, this timer is producing a new pulse, and it's a 2-second pulse. So our green light will be on for 2 seconds and off for 3.